Hello, everyone who's joining us. Hello, everybody. My name is Liz Toth. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations for Dickinson, and I'm excited to have all of you with us today for our second from in our webinar series of Dickinson from the Vault, here with Jim Grenser, our college archivist. And thank you all for joining us, especially in this homecoming and family virtual week that we are now celebrating. Jim has been our college archivist since 1998. He is definitely the college expert on all things in Dickinson's past, and we're thrilled to have him here with us today to share more of his expertise. As we move through the webinar today, please, questions are absolutely welcome. I'll ask that you direct those to the Q&A portion of the website, and we will most likely address those at the end. And we will have as long of a conversation as we can always take additional questions via email later. So with that, I'm happy to turn this over to Jim. Take it away.
Thanks very much, Liz. So welcome, everybody. I'm glad to have you back again with me virtually. So when we talked about this installment, since it was associated with homecoming, I had suggested looking at some of the college traditions, particularly around school spirit. So that's what I'll be covering today. And there are a lot of other things I could have talked about related to traditions and school spirit. So if you have other questions, again, feel free to ask them. There may be more webinars in the future, certainly, and I'm always happy to look up other things I don't even know about yet. But without further ado, I'm going to get started, and I am going to Liz, can I have screen sharing, please?
You should have it now.
Excellent, thank you. So for those of you who were with me last time, I was having to hold things up to the camera, which meant you couldn't see it nearly as well. But now, thanks to the nice people at the Academic Technology Office, I have this other device that allows me to operate more like having an overhead projector, for those of you who remember the days of transparencies and overhead projectors in classrooms. So this will make it a lot easier for you all to see the documents that I'm sharing. So in terms of college traditions, I wanted to start with the Alma Mater, since that seemed to be a good place to begin. So the Alma Mater, Noble Dickinsonia, this card, this is sort of a heavier card stock. This card of the Alma Mater dates from about the year 1900. And you can see on here, it says Horatio C. King. Horatio Collins King is a member of the class of 1858. And he was a very dedicated alum to Dickinson College. He served as a college marshal early in the 20th century as well. And he wrote numerous songs. And you can see here that the tune that it is set to is called Lauriger Horatius. Now, those of you who are familiar with the Alma Mater know that that is the tune that we also think of as O Tannenbaum, or O Christmas Tree. So this book, this Songs of Dickinson book, is the first time the Alma Mater appears in print. And you can see that Horatio King was responsible for this book in 1901. And again, it's the exact same look of the Alma Mater. Noble Dickinsonia, also Lauriger Horatius, with the Latin lyrics. So I was curious about Lauriger Horatius. So I did a little searching, found out, first of all, the O Tannenbaum lyrics written to this tune only date back to 1824. But the tune and the Latin poem go well back, possibly to the medieval era. And so I wanted to read for you what a translation of that Latin text looks like. And I think that translation will make a little bit clear why Horatio Collins King might have chosen it for the music. Laurel-crowned Horatius, true, how true thy saying, swift as wind flies over us, time devouring, slaying. Where are, oh, those goblets full of wine honey laden, strifes and loves and bountiful lips of ruddy maiden? Grows the young grape tenderly, and the maid is growing. But the thirsty poet, see, years on him are snowing. What's the use on hoary curls of the bays undying, if we may not kiss the girls, drink while time's a-flying? So when I read that, I immediately thought of the sentiment of Carpe Diem and those poems, gather ye rosebuds while ye may. That sentiment is there, so you can sort of see maybe why Horatio Collins King chose that tune in thinking about that reference to the original Latin poetry. I need to do a little more digging to see if I can find out who is credited with having written that Latin poem and crafting the original music. But in any case, I got a little bit closer to knowing some of the origin of the Alma Mater itself. So it doesn't appear, near as I can tell, that we really had an Alma Mater before about the year 1900. I haven't been able to find any earlier mention yet of the Alma Mater. But the Alma Mater, as well as numerous other songs, were included in other songbooks. So that one that Horatio Collins King was responsible for came out in 1901. There was another one published around 1905. And this one, you can see they dedicated it to Horatio Collins King because of his early work. But this was produced by Ralph Schechter, who was an early music teacher here. And on this side, you can see this dates from 1937. But one of the things that you find throughout many of the Dickinson-related songs are the colors, red and white. So the Dickinson fight song, Fling the Flags of Red and White, the old campus wall. Here's one that's titled The Red and the White. So why the red and the white? How did red and white end up being our school colors? That's a popular question. And the answer goes to our two student literary societies, the Bellett Society and the Union Philosophical Society. The Bellett Society was founded by students in 1786, and the Union Philosophical Society 3 years later in 1789. For the Union Philosophical Society, and I have a copy here of their published Constitution and Bylaws. This one's dated 1893. Their symbol for Union Philosophical Society was the white rose. And you can see right here on page 1, section 3, the badge of the society shall be a white rose to be worn on the left lapel, also a gold pin representing the Maltese cross. So there's the white rose. And for the Bellett Society, we have a little more interesting situation. So the Bellett Society, in its earlier days, so here we can see a handwritten copy of their Constitution dating from 1836. And here's the text of the badge. The badge of this society shall be an artificial pink rose worn on the left breast of the coat. So in 1836, the Bellett Society is sporting pink. And a later constitution of the Bellett Society, this one dating from the 1850s, has even more detail about the badge. But again, it's still pink. They have a lot of detail. The pink rose, stem, leaves, and buds. The whole shall not exceed 3 inches in length. The streamers from the stems to be of red ribbon, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of detail, but still pink. So it's not until sometime after the Civil War years that they move to the red rose. We actually have a pink rose. One of the actual type would have been worn. This rose belonged to William Halbert, a member of the class of 1865. So this rose would have dated from maybe 1861, 62, somewhere in there. But it's quite an interesting artifact to have still survived something that delicate. But again, it's pink. So it's not until we get into the late 1860s, 1870s that the Bellett Society moves to the red rose. So I always think it interesting that if they had not made that change, that our school colors might have ended up being pink and white instead of red and white. I have not been able to pin down exactly when the Bellett Society makes that change from pink to red, but that's something that we're still trying to pin down with greater precision. So our colors are red and white. We have an Alma Mater, and we have numerous other songs. So one of the other things that was particularly popular just as we enter the 20th century, so at the same time that the colors are becoming important, at the same time that we have an Alma Mater, there develop a lot of rules and regulations that lead to class rivalries. And some of you may recognize these little books. So these are the Dickinson Handbook, which in later years would often just be referred to as the D book, and there would be a big D printed on it. This particular handbook dates from the 1905-1906 academic year. And this is the first year in which we see rules being laid out for particularly how first-year students are supposed to behave. There are a list of 12 rules, including such things as freshmen are not permitted to carry a cane. I know this type is a little bit smaller, but you can see no underclassmen shall be permitted to carry a cane. Freshmen must prevent the congregation of preps on the campus. Freshmen shall not be permitted to smoke on the campus before February 22nd, Washington's birthday. So in this first copy of the rules and regulations, there are just 12 of them, and they all fit on this one page. So that's 1905-6. So when we get to the 1908-1909, now we see the rules starting to get to 2 pages. So now there are more details about what freshmen can and cannot do. But more importantly, this is the first time we see the appearance of what would become known as the dink. Freshmen must wear a green cap with a black button except on Sundays when a stiff hat may be worn. Any freshman going out of town must wear his class cap to and from the station. So this green cap with a black button would identify who was a freshman student. And we don't actually have any examples of the standard green cap with black button. However, we do have, when the weather would start to get colder, there was also a green woolen knit cap. And by the 19-teens, they had a gold-colored pom-pom on top of the knit caps. So this example of the knit cap is from Donald McIntyre. He was a member of the class of 1924. So this cap would be from the 1920-21 school year. So that's our earliest example of those freshman caps that were required of students. So the other part of having those caps was there were certain contests that were between typically the freshman and the sophomore class. So again, they were generating a lot of class rivalry. So they had one activity called a flag scrap, and they had another one called a poster scrap, and they had a tug of war. And so you can see as they have these contests that then they have the chance to remove their caps or relax certain other rules. And so one thing that we see is year after year, they seem to add more of these activities. And so this is the 1923-24 book. And here we actually see a number of class scraps. So there's the flag rush, the pants scrap, the football game, the basketball game, or also known as the button game, a baseball game, a tug of war, and some other things, including a parade termed the Poverty Day Parade. So there's all kinds of activities, and we actually have quite a bit of photographic evidence of these activities. So in the early part of the 20th century, it was very popular for photographers to take a photo and then turn it into a postcard, and then they could sell those postcards to the students here. So this particular image is explained by the person who sent the postcard. Dear Nanny, this picture was taken last Friday morning of the poster scrap. At about 10:30, we were on the campus tearing down posters, and a man came along and took our pictures. I suppose you can find me. I am glad this is over with. So the poster scrap was apparently a time when both freshmen and sophomores would put up different competing posters, oftentimes ridiculing the members of the other class. And we have some examples of those posters also in the collection, but they were printed on very cheap, flimsy paper, so I didn't bring any of those to show. So that's the poster scrap. Then we have an example here. Here are photos from tug of war, if it can refocus itself. So these are photos of the tug of war from 1928. And you can see they're having this tug of war literally in a big puddle of water. So, and I like the Wrigley's gum billboard behind there as well. This is another postcard image, the freshman football team. They beat the sophomores by a score of 6-0. So And if it's the team of the class of 1914, that means that game was during the spring of 1911. We have a photo here of the pants scrap of the freshmen. And we have this small photo, probably taken with a Brownie camera. And you can see there's a number of gentlemen rather oddly attired. The back of this photo says, "Freshmen caught by the tribunal for rules infractions made to perform during the half of the football game." So, so that idea of sort of then shaming the students who had broken the rules was part of the activity. And the pants scrap, I'll actually read to you what the object of the pants scrap was. "The pants scrap will be held 4 weeks after the flag rush. Each class shall furnish 50 men for this contest, dressed in 1 pair of pants, fastened in such a manner as specified by the tribunal." I should specify the tribunal is a subset of the Student Senate. "The object of the contest shall be to tear off the pants of the opponents in the given time of 10 minutes. The contest shall be decided according to the number of pants remaining at the end of the scrap." So that is the pants scrap. One of the more unusual traditions. And finally, I have a lot of photos of the flag scrap, which evolves over time. So here are some early photos. Here's the class of 19 after the winning flag scrap. And these are photos of the flag scrap. So you can kind of see in the photo, there is a pole in this one and in this one. And so in these photos, the flag scrap is taking place behind Bosler Hall, roughly where the Alt House building is, and the pathway that takes you across to the hub. So the houses that you see in the background are the houses that used to stand where the hub is now. So it was basically a game of capture the flag, where the flag was positioned up on top of the pole. And the sophomores had to defend the flag and the pole, and the freshmen had to try to capture it. So then here is another shot of a flag scrap from a later year, where you can see they're out on the athletic field now. So there's a lot more open space. And you can see a gentleman standing on top of the flag. And that dates from closer to 1920. But then as we continue on through the 1920s, the flag scrap starts to get a little more interesting. Here's another image where the person wrote on the back, I almost climbed, but I was pulled down. He wrote, "The longest 10 minutes of my life." By the late 20s into the early 30s, the flag scrap has evolved to where they actually grease the pole. So now the students are stripping down to jock straps so as not to get their clothes all greasy. And it's a free-for-all to get the flag from the top of the greased pole. I remember one time when an alum had found a number of photographs at an auction of this type and was asking, what is going on there? That is the flag scrap. So just to circle back to the dinks. So what was interesting to me, what I did not realize, is how long it took until the classic red dink that we're familiar with comes along. So it is not until the 1936-37 school year that they switch from being a green cap to Dickinson's colors of red and white. So up until the mid-1930s, the freshman cap was always green. Again, green indicating that you're green new at the college. So 36-37 is the first year that they're red. This is our earliest example of a dink donated by a member of the class of 41. And actually in 35-36, they still call it a cap. The use of the word dink first appears in the 1937-38 student handbook. And you can see there under number 4, every freshman shall wear a regulation red dink with a white button. That is the first use that we found of the word dink in the student handbooks. And an alum with the class of 2009 who's always watching eBay for Dickinson memorabilia, about a year and a half ago, he won this little stuffed dog who's wearing a Dickinson dink. We don't know exactly when he's from. I'm guessing that this dog dates from about 1950, could be a little bit earlier, but probably the kind of thing that would have been sold in the years before there was a college bookstore. You got a lot of Dickinson College gear at Cronenberg's, a department store in town on Hanover Street, the front of the building where the G-Man is located. So I thought he was really cute, so I wanted to share him as the kind of fun thing that you can find sometimes on eBay. And for those who are curious, the very last class to wear the dink was the class of 71. And this is the dink worn by Pierce Bounds, who was a college photographer for many years. He donated his dink a number of years ago. So that represents the last class to wear the dink. So, so that idea of the class rivalries was starting to fizzle out a little bit during the 1930s. So as we saw the number of different types of scraps increase through the 19-teens and 20s, as we get into the 1930s, the number of contests starts to go down in number again. And by World War II, with there being so many fewer male students on campus, that effectively puts an end to those kinds of contests. But I do want to double back to the 1930s because related to our colors of red and white is how we became known as the Red Devils. So prior to 1930, whenever you saw mention of Dickinson sports teams in the school newspaper, if they were talking about the football team, they might just refer to them as the Dickinson 11. And if it's the baseball team, the Dickinson 9. And again, the school's colors were red and white. And so there were songs celebrating the red and white. Well, at a game in 1930, there was a sports writer who referred to us as the Red Devils. So this you can see is the Dickinsonian for October 30th, 1930. And we lost the game 27-6 against George Washington. But we had held the lead of 6-0 through much of the first half and gave up a touchdown shortly before halftime. And then basically the second half was all George Washington. But you can see in this paragraph the highlights of Saturday's game. Many of us have acquired various noms de guerre, some in the cradle and others when our shoulders were bowed. But it took 148 years before the sons of John Dickinson were awarded a moniker worthy of them. Because of their savage playing in the first half, Washington correspondent of the Public Ledger called our gritters the Red Devils. So with that, Dickinson sports teams finally had a nickname. And in the very next issue of the newspaper, so this is the November 6th, and you can see the students took to it right away. And they say, Red Devils outplay PMC, Pennsylvania Military College. But game ends in a 7-7 tie. So that's where the nickname originated. It was during the fall of 1930. And so in the yearbook, at the end of the 30-31 school year, they mention that story also in the microcosm, traveling to Washington, where they were christened the Red Devils by sports writers. And the very next year after that, in the yearbook, you can see they're even putting Red Devil as the header. So this is the yearbook that would cover the 1931-32 school year. And I couldn't resist talking about the one piece of football history that people like to be reminded of, and that's the fact that Dickinson College beat Penn State. And you can see that game described here. And this curled up, shrunken football is the game ball from that Penn State game. And it's very hard to make out anymore. You can sort of see the score written in the center there, Dickinson 10 and Penn State. This football needs some serious conservation work. It actually rattles a bit like a maraca because the internal structure has all dried up and crusted. But it is evident that Dickinson College beat Penn State in 1931, a feat that I'm sure will never be repeated. So moving on to some other traditions that move us into the mid-20th century, there is the pranking of the mermaid. So we know of one instance where the college mermaid was made the object of a prank earlier in the 20th century. That took place in 1914. And you can see here, the mermaid is riding a bicycle. And Frank Masland of the Masland Carpet Factory in town was a member of the class of 1918. He did not graduate because he left to go to the war. But during his freshman year, he was responsible with a group of other people for attaching the bicycle to the mermaid. And in a letter that he wrote to Martha Slarton, the archivist in 1982, this is how he described the story. A fraternity brother and I were walking downtown in the 1914-15 year when I noticed Chaplain Springer's bicycle outside a store. You probably are aware of Dickinson's experience with Chaplain Springer. He had been a chaplain in the Army and was quite an eccentric. At any rate, I appropriated the bicycle, stored it in Alpha Chi Rho fraternity house, decided the mermaid should go for a ride, solicited the effort of, I believe, 4 other freshmen, and on the chosen night, we met at Old West with the bicycle. We found we could not get it through the hatch from the attic to the cupola. It was necessary to take it apart and reassemble it in the cupola. We began our escapade at 1 a.m. and finished as the sun came up. The tallest of our group wrapped himself around a pillar. I stood on his shoulders, someone else on mine, and Inky Moore, a pre-theological student who was like a cat, climbed up on his shoulders, reached out over the rim that circled the top of the cupola, kicked himself free, hung in midair, pulled himself up, and finally, safely, much to our relief, reached the mermaid. We threw him a rope, tied one end of the bicycle. He pulled the bicycle up, mounted it, as you see in the picture, and came down the road. The next day, the college had to send to Harrisburg for steeplejacks. So that is the first incident we're aware of the mermaid being the center of a prank. But once we get into the post-World War II era, the mermaid becomes a regular prank victim, if you will. So the idea of stealing the mermaid and then returning it during homecoming football games was something that emerged in the late 40s and early 50s. And this is a photo in 1950 of President Adele holding the mermaid, having received it from a group of students. And this photo actually shows the students with Frank Masland himself. And Frank Masland wrote on the back of the photo, "The boys kept it at Fallen Arches," which was the name of Frank Masland's house, until the homecoming game. So that's in 1950. And that tradition of stealing the mermaid and returning it at homecoming continues through the 1950s into the early 1960s. So here is a photo that Larry Rand, class of 1965, shared with us. So he says that after capturing the mermaid, she slept under my bed in Morgan Hall, B3, until she was returned on homecoming weekend. So, so that's Larry Rand and friends. And that tradition of mermaid stealing continues in various forms until it almost didn't come back. And so this is an article from, what's the date? October of 1967. In May of 1967, it was reported that the mermaid had gone missing, and it's been missing for some time, and a former Dickinsonian had the mermaid in his apartment in New York City. And you can see from this article that the college threatened legal action against the former student, and so the mermaid was returned unharmed in due course. But after that incident, the college decided that it was too dangerous to have the original mermaid on top of Old West. So during the 1967-68 school year, they had this copy made. And so you can see the copy is basically a two-dimensional mermaid as opposed to the original three-dimensional one. And the mermaid continued to be stolen. We have numerous notes. So here is one. Your mermaid is not really stolen. It was taken into protective custody by a concerned fraternity and will be returned in the near future. So this time it was stolen after it had been returned during the homecoming game, but then stolen after halftime again. President Rubendahl was not real pleased about it being stolen a second time. There is another note. The mermaid is alive and well in the hands of the freshman class of 1976. Then here's a photo of President Banks receiving the two-dimensional mermaid copy. And eventually, in the late 70s, they decide it is too dangerous to have students scrambling up on top of Old West to try and steal a mermaid. So for a period of time, there was no mermaid. And many people aren't aware that for about 10 years, from about 1977 to 87 or thereabouts, you would see Old West without the mermaid at all. You can see there's just a stick up top there. And there's another shot where you can see, once you get to the top of the cupola, no mermaid. So then During the period between President Banks and President Pritchler, George Allen, Dean of the college, was acting president, and he wanted to return the mermaid, so he had another, this time, three-dimensional replica made at that time, and they had DPS affix lots of alarms and other security measures to make sure that it was virtually impossible to steal, because nobody wanted anyone taking their life into their own hands to grab the mermaid. So we mentioned the mermaid being stolen and returned during homecoming as the tradition. Typically, one of the other homecoming traditions was different fraternities having displays outside their fraternity houses showing their school spirit. So you can tell the homecoming game this year was against Hopkins. And so some of these displays, as you can see, were quite elaborate outside the individual fraternity houses. So this tradition, again, emerges in the late 40s, early 50s, and continues on up through the 1970s. So I've got quite a few photos, and of course some of these houses no longer exist, having been replaced with other campus buildings. There's one against Haverford. And even once the fraternities move into the quad buildings, the tradition continued there as well. But one other thing that I wanted to share from homecoming is some film footage that we have. And so I'm going to switch over to a different screen. So can everybody see the video footage, Homecoming Queen and Spirit displays from 1958? So thankfully, we have a few examples in the archives of film footage from the college's early days. So I wanted to share this. I think the color is quite good still for this footage. So that is Homecoming Queen Joan Spire, I believe was her name. So this is on Biddle Field, and that is Bill Smith, the Interfraternity Council president, presenting her. There we see someone dressed up as a red devil on the field. And in a moment, it will cut away after honoring, there we go. And we cut away to some of the spirit displays outside the fraternity houses. And this footage of the spirit displays is a little bit darker, so it suggests to me this was probably filmed during the twilight hours, sometime after the football game. We played the Wilkes University, who are the colonels. So you can see a number of fraternities sort of were doing a play on words with using a different spelling of colonel. So there we see Green Giant crushed corn. It's another one of the fraternity houses that no longer stands. That's Beta Theta Pi, where Malcolm Hall is located now. And that's East College. I think Kappa Sigma might have still been located in East College at that time. So that's the end of that film clip. But while I'm at the screen, I just wanted to remind everybody that from the archives website, we have the image archive. We've digitized more than 12,000 photographs so far. So here's a bunch of the homecoming spirit displays. We've just been, over the last few months, posting some copies of audio-visual materials that we have. So you can see old commencement footage there. We have the microcosms. We have the Dickinsonians. So again, there's lots of things you can find at archives.dickinson.edu to browse whenever you care to look for some college history. And if you don't find what you're looking for, feel free to email us, archives@dickinson.edu at any time. So that's all I have, Liz. I'm happy to take any questions that may have come.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We do have a few questions already, and if those who are listening have more, please feel free to type them in the Q&A section. So Jim, our first question, did the red and white rose have anything to do with the Tudors and the Yorks in the 100-Year Wars in England?
Not that we're aware of, particularly since the Bellett Society had chosen the pink rose as a badge. It doesn't even hold that that Union Philosophical Society would have chosen a white rose after that as a foil to the red, again, since Bellett didn't choose red until after the Civil War. So that seems to be just coincidental.
Our next question, do the UPS and Bellett Society still exist? And if so, what do they do?
I'm not certain if UPS still exists. UPS has come and gone a number of times over the years. It had been resurrected in the 1970s by a group of students, and it had come again in the early 2000s. I knew some students who got Union Philosophical restarted. So I'm not certain if there is a Union Philosophical Society operating right now. The Bellett Society does continue to operate. They have continued to produce a literary magazine, the John Dickinson Review. So as far as I know, the Bellett Society does continue to operate. And in fact, not this past academic year, but the year before that, a number of Bellett Society members came into the archives to look at their older constitutions and other documents. I should also mention, we have a lot of the Bellett Society history preserved, but not as much as Union Philosophical Society. So much of Union Philosophical Society's materials were lost in the Denny Hall fire in 1904. The fire started on the side of the building where the UPS hall was located. So very little of their records were saved, but most all of the Bellett Society records were saved because they had time to get things out of the other side of the building.
Our next question, does the 2D mermaid replaced in the 80s still exist somewhere?
I don't think it does. I did see it at one time, very early when I first started working here, but I think it got lost. It wasn't part of the archives collections. I think I had seen it in the facilities building at one time and didn't even realize what it was. But as far as I know, it no longer exists.
Our next question, it's hard to believe no one was ever seriously injured trying to climb up the cupola to steal the mermaid. Are you aware of any injuries, serious or otherwise?
I'm not, and yes, it is amazing that nobody ever got seriously hurt, because I think that would have put a fast end to that tradition. It took quite a while before they finally made the decision not to support that anymore. Again, it had gone on for the better part of 30 years, from the late 40s through the late 70s. Yes, as far as I know, no one was ever seriously hurt.
Well, that's good. Was there an official or unofficial reason why dinks were discontinued? I know they were demeaning, but they were demeaning for a long time. What transpired in 1972?
I'm not sure. And it's actually 67. So the members of the class of 71 would have had the dinks for the 67, 68 school year. But that is something that I could look into to see if there's any mention in student senate meetings or something among other college offices about why they were discontinued. I'm not sure if it was something that was also being discontinued at other schools. Because one thing that's interesting is when you look at other colleges and universities, many of those kinds of traditions are all taking place at the same time. So the idea of the class rivalries, the idea of the dinks, those kinds of things were a pattern across the United States. Dickinson wasn't unique in that. So it is kind of interesting to see those sorts of waves and movements of student life.
Our next question. I've seen you've also put a lot of transcripts of the journals of Horatio Collins King on the website. Have you done any crowdsourcing to transcribe more of the documents in your vaults?
We have not. We have sometimes had volunteers offer to do some transcribing of bits and pieces. So sometimes it's been living descendants who have been interested in their ancestors' diaries or letters, and we've made photocopies for them that they transcribed for us. Usually it is our undergraduate student workers who do the transcribing. We'll typically have one student do a draft and a second student double check that draft. We've tried to set up occasionally some crowdsourcing on our own websites, but honestly, part of the difficulty is just managing it and keeping track of all of that. So it becomes more of a personnel time issue on our end to be able to manage that side of it.
Our next question, is there something specific from each Dickinson class that gets added to the archives each year?
There isn't. That would be really wonderful. But typically what comes to the archives tends to come many, many years later. So it is alumni when they are sometimes moving from one house to another and they decide, at that stage in their life, they no longer want to carry some of those older things along with them anymore. Sometimes things are discovered on eBay that had been let go of by a family member and sold or auctioned off elsewhere. But no, we don't have anything that comes automatically to the archives with each successive year from that class.
A few people have chimed in about Dink history who were from those classes in the 70s in the chat. So I believe this is Pierce Bounds who's saying that we of the great class of 71 just decided we were done with the whole Dink thing, took them off, and that was that.
so no one challenged them when they did it.
And Greg says that as a member of the class of 1970, I think that the events of the summer of 68 with lots of unrest around the country may have led to the end of traditions like the Dink. So general unrest and just being over it sounds like.
It's nice when everybody breaks the rules together so that, there's, how can you discipline all of them, right? Solidarity works well.
Yes. And I think we have time for one more question. Was Horatio King a professional musician or was he just a hobbyist who had a special interest in his alma mater?
He was just a hobbyist. So he was in the publishing industry and but he was, after being a soldier during the Civil War, that's when he then got into publishing, lived in Brooklyn, New York, and was just a really interested alum who did a lot of things. Also was very active with the Grand Army of the Republic group. So a lot of Civil War veteran activities as well that he was very active with. He also created the Marshal's baton. So he was the first college marshal and then had the Marshal's baton. And that tradition also started in the early 20th century. So the Marshal's baton that is still carried by a faculty member today, currently Professor Zwemer, that is the same baton that Horatio Collins King donated himself.
Well, thank you, Jim, very much for this wonderful trip down Dickinson history. We've really enjoyed it. And thank you very much to all of you who are joining us today. We are recording this. We'll share the recording, and we hope to see you next time. If you have any other questions, you can reach out to archives@dickinson.edu or any of us on this webinar. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.